This is easily my highest requested video, so here are my top 5-ish damage tips for Brewmaster monks in Season 2 of The War Within. I do want to quickly mention a few caveats about this video. First off, it's going to be mostly focused on Mythic Plus. I'm also assuming that you probably know most things about the general kit for Brewmaster, so this isn't necessarily a guide, but it's a way to improve your damage. And at the time of recording this, both Master of Harmony and Shado-pan are equally preferred at the top end of play. The reason I want to mention this is that these tips kind of will apply to one or the other more often, and vice versa. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Let's start with our general tips first, and let's start with Charred Passions. This is a talent choice in our spec tree, and it's the staple of most builds due to the interaction with our tier set. This causes Blackout Kick and Spinning Crane Kick to deal 50% additional damage as fire. This can be upwards of 8 to 10% of your overall damage if optimized. The best way to maintain this is by getting in the habit of keeping Breath of Fire on cooldown as often as possible. This means following Keg Smash with a Breath of Fire, but you can also pre-cast Breath of Fire before a pull, making sure that your Spinning Crane Kick is dealing maximum damage for maximum threat. Don't worry about the cooldown because Salsabim's strength will refresh the cooldown of Breath of Fire, so you can always still apply it to mobs for that additional DR. Next, we do have one more of our niche buffs. This is called Blackout Combo. This talent causes Blackout Kick to buff the Brewmaster's next ability. When analyzing this from a pure DPS point of view, there are essentially two options. You have Tiger Palm, which will deal 100% more damage, and Breath of Fire, which will deal 50% more damage. What's not very clear is that Breath of Fire only increases the direct damage and not the damage over time effect. This direct damage is valuable, but often won't be a higher DPS increase until you have at least 8 or more targets roughly. This means that Tiger Palm is generally the best option for Blackout Combo. This means that whenever you do cast Blackout Kick, you should try to make it a priority in most pulls to hit Tiger Palm, and ideally on a priority target, since this is after all a single target ability. This will also become more valuable when playing Master of Harmony due to overwhelming force. When you find yourself in Priory of the Sacred Flame, Floodgate, or Cinderbrew Meadery, these are the dungeons where Blackout Kick will favor Breath of Fire damage compared to Tiger Palm. Originally, when preparing for this video, I wasn't going to include this, but I have been noticing players not taking advantage of this as much as they should, but that's this little talent right here. This is Fatal Touch, which causes Touch of Death to grant the Brewmaster 5% more damage for 30 seconds after casting. This means that Brewmasters should try to optimize trying to land this ability as often as they can from pull to pull. Now, this is nuanced because sometimes Touch of Death can be the deciding factor on skipping a mechanic on a boss or killing a boss a second faster, which can be the make or break between a key getting timed, but from trash pull to trash pull, you should generally try to cast this as often as you can. My last general tip is more of a reminder for those who are playing Special Delivery. This talent causes any of your brews to throw a keg high up into the air, which will land a few seconds later, dealing pretty good damage. This makes our defensive abilities like Celestial Brew and Purifying Brew and Fortifying Brew a small offensive gain. This video isn't meant to talk about defensive usage, but this is a big argument why you should keep Purifying Brew on cooldown and use Celestial Brew as often as you can, because you're constantly benefiting from cooldown reduction, and you're getting rewarded in damage for pressing it. Moving into the hero talents, let's start with Master of Harmony. This has been a more popular choice lately because of buffs and the interaction it has with our tier set. And I have two big tips here when optimizing for damage. First and foremost, the major damage component of this tree is your stored vitality. In essence, a percentage of all the damage and healing you do is stored. And then by hitting Celestial Brew, you expunge this vitality onto enemies doing damage over time. The best way to store vitality quickly is by using hard-hitting AoE spells like Exploding Keg and Chi Burst. Depending on the size of the pull, this can easily generate from anywhere from 10% to 30% total vitality. These two abilities should always be used when you're able to store vitality, and then you cast Celestial Brew to expel this for damage. Once you cast Celestial Brew, it's very important that you don't cast another Celestial Brew until that vitality is all expelled and the dot runs out. You will lose out on the vitality dot if you happen to overlap. And because of this and the interaction that Exploding Keg and Chi Burst have in storing vitality, you also want to make sure you're not using it right after you hit Celestial Brew. Because when you're currently expelling, you're not storing any new vitality, and you're going to miss out on that extra stored vitality from Keg and Chi Burst. My second tip comes down to how the talent Overwhelming Force works within our kit. This causes all of your single target abilities to send out a frontal shockwave, dealing cleave damage. This frontal cone is actually a lot tighter than you might think. This means that your positioning is really important. As a tank, you want to keep the mobs stacked neatly, and ideally in front of you. Not only will this grant you more damage through the Overwhelming Force talents, but this also means you're going to be storing more vitality per second, and it means you're going to also expel more vitality per cast of Celestial Brew. If you keep on to these 2 or 3 rules, your damage should improve. Last but not least, let's talk about Shado-pan, which is my preferred hero talent. There are a few damage optimization things that actually can occur within this hero talent, but the beef of this hero talent damage comes down to Flurry Strikes, and the Brewmaster's ability to manage their resource economy. Flurry Strikes will proc whenever the Brewmaster spends 240 energy. This ideally will happen every 16 to 20 seconds. Each time you proc Flurry Strikes, you will gain a buff for 16 seconds that grants you Verse Mastery or crits. These buffs aren't super important, but there is a 4th buff that can deal a ton of damage if optimized. This is the Shadow Damage proc, and instead of lasting for 16 seconds, it lasts for 40, meaning that as soon as you gain this buff, your goal is to get 2 more procs of Flurry Strikes within this window. This should happen naturally with a well-executed rotation, but utilizing Blackout Brew is the best way to fast-track this and to guarantee you land 2. Blackout Brew not only resets your Celestial Brew and Purifying Brew charges, but also refills your energy bar, which I think is massively underappreciated aspect of this talent. This means that you can get really aggressive with your Tire Palm spam and your Keg Smash casts. This shadow damage is nothing to scoff at. A portion of this damage does boil down to RNG, because it can proc in any order, but this ends up being 80% of Flurry Strike's total damage, which is a massive percent. Essentially, pay attention to this buff and use Blackout Brew as a damage cooldown. And that's it. Of course, if I missed any tips you want to share, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you have any questions, also leave them down below, and of course, a massive shout out to all my Patreon supporters, because without them, I couldn't make content like this. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.